Larouche is a political news media place. You can find hot-button issues from their perspective and discover coverage that you will not see on the networks. The fact is that the founder, Lyndon LaRouche, has been notoriously correct with his predictions. It just may be the right time for us to do this program with such a prognosticator at the helm. We are strangers in a strange land at this point in history, and the world needs the information right now. I'm happy to have LaRouche National Spokesman Representative Dennis Speed with us today. Welcome, Dennis.
Happy to be here, Chris.
All right, so now there's a bunch of stuff that we're talking about, and I want to talk about it with your knowledge of where the LaRouche movement is and how do you feel about some of these topics. And let's talk about Ebola, because that's a hot thing of late.
Yeah. Well, this is an interesting one because, you know, the first time that people knew of Ebola, there was a sort of a possible sighting of it in 1973, but by 1976, it was known as a particularly virulent sort of fast form of AIDS. AIDS wasn't yet known, so they didn't talk about it. And it's not that it's related, but the symptoms are really horrific, and they happen very quickly once they emerge. Anyway, in 1974, Lyndon LaRouche had commissioned a group of people. He had a crew of people who were physicists, some scientists, that he was in touch with, and he created something called the Ecological Holocaust Task Force. And he was trying to look at this idea: was there a situation that was converging from a planetary standpoint? This was now before climate change and those things, not that. But were there new biological agents that were actually beginning to emerge, partially as a result of the failed economic policies of many different countries? And LaRouche was very critical of economic policies from the International Monetary Fund at that time. So he wrote up a report in 1974, which was called Economic Breakdown and the Threat of Global Pandemics. And I cite this because there was a CIA report done in the year 2000, which talked about the fact that during the period of 1977 through 2000, these new diseases, including Ebola, which they named there, had emerged.
When was this again?
Their report came out in 2000, 14 years ago. And they were referring to the fact that these new diseases, new strains of disease had suddenly emerged. And the reason I cite it here, Chris, is because not only did LaRouche do that in 1974, in 1984, he put out another report, which was an updated version of the first report. And that was just at the point that people began to hear about human immunodeficiency virus,
the AIDS,
HIV.
Yeah, right.
Now, I'm saying this because where we are now today, this is a very serious thing.
Yeah.
Some people are saying that they don't believe all the people are dying. Some people are saying many different things. Some people are trying to say it was produced in a laboratory. Whatever you believe about how it was produced, the truth of the matter is that we're dealing with 5 different strains of what's called Ebola. And the problem that we've got right now, unless somebody's doing something in secret in a laboratory that we don't know about, is that the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, and other organizations in the United States are using only one strain. They're only looking at an isolated single strain of 5 different strains. A friend of mine who's a doctor of public health, her name is Deborah Freeman, and I've known her since the 1970s. She's been in touch with various people down at Johns Hopkins and other locations, and tells me that the strain of Ebola that we're looking at, it has mutated 300 times over the course of the last approximately 4 to 5 years. Now, that's not extraordinarily fast for certain viruses that mutate.
Sounds very, very
yeah, it sounds bad to the rest of us, right?
Yeah.
I'll take it. Okay, I'm not going to worry or quibble about the number of times. But what's important is that this strain is behaving differently than Ebola as we've known it through now. So this is a crisis that's going to probably require a crash program internationally for public health. It's sort of an international public health emergency, and it won't just go away by people dropping food or dropping medical supplies. This is going to actually require a multinational integrated task force that's going to have to be updating its findings and working together to try to get this, number one, contained in West Africa, and number 2,
what is the significance about the location of its derivation in West Africa?
There's several people that wonder about this because actually Ebola had broken out somewhat earlier, several years ago.
In a different area,
yeah,
right?
right, in Uganda,
Right.
where it was in the rural area and was controlled rather quickly. But this outbreak in the three nations, Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia, is particularly worrisome because a lot of this has also gone from the countryside into the cities and also is pretty ensconced there. And the problem involved in getting control of it now. See, Doctors Without Borders and some of the other
Right.
Organizations had warned 11 months ago that we would get to where we are now. And now the problem is that your medical personnel who are either untrained or don't have the equipment are dying very rapidly. And even where we have actual treatment, which we've had some of, when you have to use the equipment that they get trained in, what people note is, the doctors that is, you're inside of a suit in which all of your body moisture is contained. You can't touch your face, you can't scratch your face or anything like that. You have to stand for 3 and 4 hours at a time, and the issue is you get elevated body temperature, you get other kinds of problems, and then you can't see out of the mask to treat the people.
The heat temperature has risen to the
Yeah.
point where it's fogging up
Where
and
it
you're
fogs
getting
up the actual
condensation
screen.
and stuff like that.
Yeah, this kind of thing. And this is the happy condition. This is where in which they're treating people, and this has been somewhat successful. We've been bringing down to some degree the death rate, but the real question, the real problem is, are governments going to at least see this as important as they saw the so-called bailout of 2008? You know, we bailed out a bunch of banks that some people argue should never have been bailed out. I happen to believe that myself.
Right.
But are we prepared to do anything equivalent, okay, internationally I'm talking about, to actually conquer what may be a life-threatening disease for the planet?
What kind of bailout would that look like?
Well,
They were going,
of course, in the case of the banks, there was an $800 billion official bailout, but then Senator Bernie Sanders, when he got the documents from the Federal Reserve, the Freedom of Information Act allowed him to get them. He was a U.S. Senator to get request. Their figures came out to $16.7 trillion. So I would put it this way. I think if you're talking about saving lives, recognizing how easily this can be transmitted, you're talking about a crash program that would have to employ hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of medical personnel and would cost you in the order of $1 to $2 trillion right away. So that's why it has to be international. It has to be a lot of different nations who pool their resources, and the reason that they ought to is because everybody's in jeopardy.
I was going to say, when we're out of money, who's going to be left with money?
That's exactly the point. Well, also, if we're out of lives, we won't need money. So
That's for sure.
But nonetheless, there has been some progress on this front. I don't mean that it's completely run amok and everybody's getting sick. Matter of fact, one of the things that's happening right now in Lagos, Nigeria, nearby, they had a few cases of it right in the major city there. And you know, that's a country of over 100 million people. And they were able, through very strict medical procedures, to bring the thing right under control. So it wasn't spreading, was the point. Yes, they still had the problem with the mortality of the people that had it,
right,
but they stopped it from spreading. And so there are some hopeful signs that this can actually be contained and eventually, we hope, reversed.
I'm glad we got that through. Thank you. We're going to jump to a couple of other hot button political potatoes, as we said in the beginning.
Okay.
Let's go. What happened today? Let's start there.
This was, you're talking about the event that happened up in Canada with the shooting that happened up there. Well, that's interesting because 2 days earlier, on Monday, there had been an incident in which there was a gunman, also a guy with a gun and a knife, who was also killed. Now, in this case, this was an Islamic convert, and so this was a person that was actually identifying themselves as ISIS. In the case today, we don't yet know that. But what happened was that a soldier was killed today. A man basically shot him and then
it was shot in Parliament.
He ran into the Parliament.
But
that was exactly. And so he killed the soldier outside of Parliament, ran into Parliament, started shooting. A sergeant at arms who was armed shot and killed the man. So he saved innumerable lives.
Right.
So that was the good part of the story.
Having a gun was good then.
Having a gun was
you never know. It's getting
excellent.
Confusing.
It was excellent.
Isn't it getting confusing?
I don't know. I don't find this situation confusing at all. In fact, I wonder what happened to the soldier. But in any case, what's now gone on, they shut down Parliament for a while. They reopened it. And I'd just like to say that only a few days ago, I was up in Ottawa. And in fact, I was speaking there on behalf of Executive Intelligence Review magazine, which is Lyndon LaRouche's magazine. There were about 11 or 12 countries that were in attendance at that meeting. And we were having a discussion about many different things. And one of the things that came up, interestingly, was I think about 7 days before I was there, I think it was sometime like October 8th or 9th, former Senator Bob Graham of Florida, who had chaired this commission, Joint Investigation Commission on 9/11, had spoken to a Canadian journalist who'd done a big story in Canada. And the Canadian journalist asked him this question. He said, our government in Canada has just decided.
Brent Banbury? Is that the guy?
That's right. That's
okay.
him. Brent Banbury. That was him. Yeah. And he was concerned because Canada had just decided that they were going to join into the ISIS effort. They were going to join the United States and basically try to go after ISIS.
Right.
So what he raised was, to Senator Graham, what do you think about this? And do you think that your work when you were doing the 9/11 commission, was there anything that would have given us clues about this thing called ISIS, the strength of it, and so on? Right. Senator Graham said that if a particular 28 pages that were cut out of his report, it was an 800-page report, but there were 28 pages that were never released. And he said if those pages had been released, he did not believe that ISIS could ever have actually even existed.
When did that happen? When did the cutout happen?
Well, the cutout happened back in 2002. The report was done right after 9/11.
Okay.
Right, exactly. Then it was a joint House of Representatives and Senate committee. So it was they had the House Intelligence Committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee. Bob Graham was on it, and Porter Goss, I think, for the Congress. So what happened was they wrote a report. And in their report, there were 28 pages that were never revealed to the public, even though Bob Graham, Porter Goss, and everybody that otherwise served on the committee said there's no reason for national security to suppress these pages. Now, the families of 9/11 victims have asked for those pages also. And what I can tell you that I know about the pages.
Why haven't we heard about this before?
You've heard, well, Graham was interviewed by a few people, like around the Bill Maher show or some of these others at the time.
I just don't remember hearing about it.
I know you don't remember, because and there is a reason. It's because a name is contained of a country that is supposedly one of our main allies right now.
You're talking about Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia, yes.
Son of a gun, how did I know that?
How did you know that?
Just because we're supposed to be an ally.
Right? And so what the problem is that the Saudi former ambassador to the United States, whose name was Prince Bandar bin Sultan, well-known person, personally financed 2 of the 19 hijackers that we have identified as being identified in 9/11.
Right.
He did it through a bank account, which was Riggs Bank. Now, whether that's in the pages, I don't know, but I happen to know that that's the case.
Yeah.
So the danger would be if those are the people that we now have training.
And we wonder why we have conspiracy floating around.
But not only that, we just announced that we were giving the Saudis $500 million to train.
We were paying them to come back and get us.
Which, of course,
isn't that interesting?
Yeah. So I think that's probably why Senator Graham was even giving the interview. And the reason I bring it up is because that happened only a few days before these incidents suddenly occurred. I'm not necessarily connecting them, but I will say Canada's a pretty peaceful place. You never hear about this kind of stuff going on up there.
Yeah, I wonder if it's not tied to the fact that they agreed to support us. And
well, I think that's what the reporter was getting at. He was getting at, he was uncomfortable with it. And I think actually one other thing to know is, if I'm not mistaken, that Glenn Greenwald, of this Edward Snowden fame, the guy that leaked the whole thing with Edward Snowden, he is supposed to be, I think he's appearing up in Canada, in Montreal. I believe it's even tomorrow. He's been making a big issue about this whole thing, about the Canadian support and the fact that Canada's really been at war for 13 years, going back to 9/11. So this is one of these stories that's evolving, and it's going to maybe lead in a lot of different directions.
Yeah.
And people can stay posted by going to our site. You referenced Larouche PAC, and that's one place they can go, LarouchePAC.com. There's also Larouche Pub. And that's LarouchePublications.com.
Oh, I see. Okay, I didn't know what that was. Larouche is L-A, capital R-O-U-C-H-E, PAC, P-A-C.
Right.
.com, okay. Right. Just a quick change on the global war. It's a recent communication I heard from the organization saying that to avoid global war, Obama must be stopped. Now, you guys are still on the impeaching.
Very heavily so. I mean, basically,
Impeaching Obama is what should happen.
Look at the thing that's just happened with Ebola. I mean, what you had, the week of the United Nations General Assembly, when it opened up and Barack Obama was in New York, he gave 3 speeches. The first one was on climate change.
And don't forget the 5 political fundraisers.
Well, that's another thing. Exactly. He's got time for that.
He does. Golf too.
So he gave his, a speech at the General Assembly, and then he also gave a speech around Ebola. Now, here's the problem. He gives a speech calling for a mobilization of 4,000 American troops to go to Liberia. He's saying they're going to send troops.
Rather than...
Well, I mean, what are they doing? I mean, they're not trained as medical personnel.
Untrained combatants
Yeah.
to a place where...
Now, where
health issues
70% of the people that catch a disease die a horrible death. And we're going to send people in. Is this got a military purpose? Well, of course, this is an issue.
Right.
It's an issue in those countries.
I'm very upset about that.
Yeah, it's an issue for us. So that kind of exemplifies for me why Obama needs to be impeached. If the threat of impeachment, by the way, doesn't get raised quickly, you won't even get anything, in my view, rational out of the administration. I don't believe that you'll get anything competent, even if you get something rational. But what we're right now getting, for example, the guy that he's just appointed to oversee the Ebola effort.
He has no training whatsoever.
No training whatsoever.
He's a political hawk.
He was the chief of staff for Al Gore, and in 2008, when he gave some talk, he was being interviewed by a reporter, he said, well, his view was that the #1 problem to be considered when you look at the globe and the question of globalization was overpopulation. So, of course, a lot of people are nervous about that, because if you get a guy that thinks that overpopulation is the #1 problem and you put him in charge of the Ebola epidemic effort, and he has no medical training in addition, he's a political operative. I mean, what's on a scale of 1 to 10, the possibility for cover-up coming from a guy like that is about 350. So I think it's not only right to be nervous about it, I think it's right to be preemptive.
Yeah. I don't see the reason why some of his selections actually came to fruition. I don't understand. Isn't he got to check? Isn't there anybody checking on these things?
I think
how do you leave yourself so vulnerable? That was an immediate vulnerable sign.
There's a problem. I mean, just to set the record straight, Executive Intelligence Review and people around Lyndon LaRouche were very unhappy with Dick Cheney and George Bush as well.
Right.
All right? And we actually always refer to the Cheney-Bush administration, not the Bush-Cheney administration.
Right.
And so I don't want to in any way imply that what we're doing is merely going after the Democrats because we support the Republicans.
Right,
That's not it. In the case of Obama, from the time of his first year when he began that business with health care, we became somewhat famous for putting a certain item below his nose. It was a little mustache.
Right.
And a lot of people got very upset with us about that, but what we were saying about that was that the health care policy that he was pursuing... I'm glad
you're giving me a chance to describe this, because a lot of people approached me about that.
Oh, yeah, and a lot of people were very upset about it, and they were supposed to get upset about it. But our point was, we didn't put the mustache there, he did. And what we were referring to was that the medical policy he was announcing, whether he knew it or not, was the same exact policy that was Tiergarten 4, was called T4.
I remember that.
Yeah, that the Nazi euthanasists first talked about, and that was the idea, that the measures that he was talking about were nearly identical. And when Sarah Palin then got criticized for talking about death panels, she was completely accurate. I mean, that's just the fact of the matter.
Right.
She may have abbreviated, she may have not given all the details that she needed to give, but she was also reacting in a kind of a visceral way to what she was hearing.
It's funny, but we had a doctor here we interviewed a couple of months ago who was against the Affordable Care Act, and mentioned very clearly that inside the language of the document that Pelosi said we'll have to pass it before we know what's inside of it, has language about... They're not calling it death panels. We can summarize it and say that's what it is, but the description, it is what it is.
Right. Yeah, that's all. And Sarah Palin deciding that she would be unlike a lot of the other people who are in the Congress or in politics generally, decided not to double talk it and to just say, well, what this actually is.
Right.
Huh?
Yeah, and that's
so,
it. Yeah.
Right. And so, and it was not, it was an absolutely fair comment as far as we were concerned. And so I'm simply saying that from that time, things have gotten worse. I mean, we've had incursions into places like Libya. This happens to be, by the way, the 3rd anniversary of the week in which Gaddafi was killed. Has Libya improved since he was dead? We may not like Gaddafi more than the next guy. I have no problem with that dislike for him. But the issue is not that at all. Look at Libya today. It's a runaway terrorist stronghold. We don't even know who's there.
Yeah.
And then, of course, our ambassador was also killed.
There are a lot of people said that every time we attempt to knock off one of these leaders, that the situation gets worse. It doesn't get better.
And of course, therefore, whether Obama does this by design, which is one thing, that'd be bad. But if he's doing it by accident, that's even worse. So the issue becomes, becomes competence for the United States to survive, particularly when you get to something like the Ebola and related matters.
Sure. We don't have a lot of time to cover some of the other things we wanted to, so we'll have to call you back on another day, but we have a few minutes left, and
sure.
I'd like to know what your interests are going forward, and do you want to continue to make that statement that you want to...
Yeah, I guess basically the issue is what we're saying is you can have a crash program. For example, we need a vaccine of some type. We also need to shore up the situation in Western Africa because there's another thing that does happen. You see, there are a lot of people that also survive Ebola, and they develop antibodies. And that's important because it means that an immunity may be being developed in that very population that's now undergoing.
Sure.
Right. So therefore, you got to get people in there. Yeah, that's what happens. And so the combination of effects, if we concentrated with a military equivalent effort, in other words, not a military effort.
Yeah, I got it.
But you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of people.
For our audience sake, we need people who are qualified to help in that area, not soldiers.
That's right, exactly. You need to develop medical personnel. Matter of fact, a couple of our doctors have recently worked, ironically, with the Cubans, because the Cubans have a pretty good health system. They just put 200 doctors on the ground there. Now, of course, the issue to me would be, let's get everybody on the ground. Anybody that thinks they're likely to get an Ebola case or could get an Ebola case.
Just not soldiers.
I mean, you would think the Indians are going to be interested because of all the poverty in India. The Chinese, they got 1.4 billion people. You get one case there. So there's plenty of people who I think are going to see it in their
Chinese would probably jump on board. They've had more trouble with flu epidemics than any country.
So that's what you want to do. You want to, in other words, use the occasion of the crisis to power ahead to a new kind of set of political relations, but they're not political. That's the whole point. Political relations that are not political. They're about survival.
Absolutely. And for Larouche, what's in store for Larouche at the moment? What's hot on Larouche's table of events to handle?
Lyndon LaRouche is 92 years old. What he does is takes it one day at a time.
He's still with us.
He's ready to talk, and he's ready to give policies, and that's the way that we're still going. He's the catalyst of a lot of this.
He still has a great message, I think, and it seems to me that he's been accurate, as I mentioned in the opening.
Well, the thing that gets people about LaRouche, the thing that's famous, of course, is, actually, we're coming up on a famous LaRouche broadcast because on November 9th, the Berlin Wall, 25 years ago, fell. 1 year before that, on October 12th, on Columbus Day, Lyndon LaRouche did a press conference in Berlin in which he said at the time that there should be a reunification of Germany because the Soviet Union was in danger of collapsing 1 year before. Now that's one of those that was so eerie because I remember it because he was running for president at the time.
Who he was?
Yeah, at that time, Lyndon LaRouche was running for president in 1988, and we had to raise money for the campaign. And when he did this press conference and then wanted it to be a show in America, all of us said, everybody is honest among our members said, why is he doing this? We're just like, what has this got to do with anything?
Turns out it was
on the money.
I didn't know about the Russian collapse or the thought of the Russian possibility of collapse.
That's because he had been involved with negotiating with the Russians on behalf of Ronald Reagan's administration.
Well, thank God he was successful.
Yeah.
Dennis, thank you very much. We had to finish up for the day. We ran short of time, but
No
thank
problem.
you very much. Good job. Societal and political trends are rapidly breaking down our nation. It once was the cornerstone of our great culture. At FIT, we bring this information every single week, and I hope that you'll continue to watch us. You can go to YouTube and click on the channels, go to FIT-TV, then select channels, and then you'll pick us up. My name is Chris DiMaggio. Thank you for watching FIT TV, and we'll see you again next week.
Properly inflating my tires burns less fuel and saves me money on gas. Yeah, I'm saving Mother Nature from pollution, but more importantly, she saved me $11. Ow!
Environmental defense. Get green.
By keeping my car regularly tuned, I save money on gas and repairs. That also means cleaner air. You know, feels good to help save the cash, planet.
Environmental defense. Get green. For more tips, go to getgreen.com.
Introducing the all-new Enclave. It's a minivan to the max, with features like remote control sliding rear doors, 150 cable channels, a full sky view roof, temperature-controlled cup holders, and the 6-point navigation system. It's the minivan for families on the go.